It all began with an ordinary invitation that spiraled into chaos. My brother-in-law, a man I trusted as family, asked my wife to meet him for lunch, claiming he needed to discuss something important. At first, it seemed harmless after all. We were a tight-knit family who shared laughter, holidays, and countless memories. But nothing could have prepared us for what happened next. In the bustling cafe, surrounded by oblivious patrons sipping coffee and chatting casually, he confessed his love for her. His words weren't just sweet, they were obsessive, laced with promises so absurd they bordered on delusional. "I'd leave everything," he whispered hoarsely, "even my own family, if you'd choose me." The air froze around them. My wife, stunned and overwhelmed, felt the weight of betrayal crush her chest. As she abruptly stood up, her chair screeched against the floor, silencing nearby conversations. Every eye turned toward her, but she didn't care. Her mind raced with panic, guilt, and disbelief. How could someone she trusted so deeply betray her like this? When my wife returned home, her hands trembled so violently she could barely hold her phone. She called me immediately, her voice cracking as she recounted the horrifying confession at the cafe. "What if your sister finds out?" she whispered, her words laced with panic. "She's pregnant with their third child. This could destroy her." Her guilt was palpable. She felt like an unwilling accomplice in a crime she never asked to be part of. As we spoke, her phone buzzed incessantly on the kitchen counter, texts and calls from my brother-in-law flooding in like a storm. Each notification lit up the screen with desperate pleas. "Please don't tell her. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. You have to understand." The weight of his obsession pressed down on her, suffocating. Overwhelmed, she left work early, unable to focus. When she arrived home, she paced the living room, her face pale, muttering about how she had always tried to maintain boundaries but now felt cornered. "Why did he do this to us?" she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was well past midnight when the phone rang, shattering the silence of the house. My sister answered, her voice groggy with sleep, only to be met with my brother-in-law's frantic tone. "You need to know something," he blurted out, his words tumbling over each other in a rehearsed panic. He accused my wife, my innocent, unsuspecting wife, of trying to seduce him, spinning an elaborate lie that left us all reeling. According to him, she had made advances during a recent family gathering, pulling him into a secluded corner and initiating an embrace, even planting a kiss on his cheek before whispering coy remarks about their supposed connection. The audacity of his fabrication was staggering. Every word dripped with manipulation, designed to paint himself as the victim and my wife as the instigator. At first, my sister sounded confused, her voice trembling, as she tried to process what he was saying. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her disbelief barely masked. But as he continued, weaving intricate details into his story, details so specific they seemed almost plausible, her confusion turned to suspicion. She knew my wife too well to believe such nonsense, but the seed of doubt had been planted, gnawing at her trust. By the time the call ended, my sister was wide awake, her mind racing with questions. She didn't confront him outright. Instead, she resolved to dig deeper, determined to uncover the truth behind his sudden confession. The next morning, she called me, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Something isn't right," she said. "Why would he call me in the middle of the night with this? And why now?" Her instincts were sharp, honed by years of navigating life's complexities. Together, we began piecing together the timeline of events, retracing the moments leading up to his bizarre accusation. It became clear that his late-night call wasn't just an act of desperation, it was a calculated move, an attempt to shift blame and rewrite history before anyone could challenge his version of the truth. The confrontation unfolded in the dimly lit living room, where every word felt like a knife slicing through the fragile veneer of our family's unity. My sister, her face pale but resolute, sat across from my brother-in-law, who looked like a man teetering on the edge of collapse. The air was thick with tension, each breath heavy with unspoken accusations and raw emotion. He began by sobbing uncontrollably, his voice cracking as he begged for forgiveness. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he pleaded, his hands trembling as he clutched the hem of his shirt. "It was just feelings I couldn't control." But when pressed further, his demeanor shifted abruptly. His eyes, once filled with tears, now burned with defiance. "You're all ganging up on me," he snapped, his voice rising sharply. "You've made me feel like a monster, like I'm some kind of criminal. None of this would have happened if you hadn't forced me into a corner." His words hung in the air, sharp and accusatory, as though he was trying to rewrite the narrative and cast himself as the victim. The audacity of his defense left us stunned, but it only fueled my sister's determination to expose the truth. That's when she revealed what she had discovered earlier that night, a secret folder buried deep within his laptop. With a steady hand, she opened the file labeled innocuously as vacation photos and began scrolling through its contents. Hundreds of images filled the screen, each one a chilling testament to his obsession. There were photos of my wife at family gatherings, candid shots taken without her knowledge, and even close-ups from a beach trip we had taken years ago. In one particularly unsettling image, she stood alone on the shoreline, her silhouette illuminated by the fading sun. It was clear he had zoomed in, cropping out everything else to focus solely on her. My wife gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she stared at the screen. "I had no idea," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's been doing this for years." The realization hit her like a tidal wave, and tears began streaming down her face. My sister, however, remained composed, her expression hardening with each photo she reviewed. When she reached a series of images from our Caribbean vacation, her jaw tightened. These weren't just casual snapshots, they were deliberate, calculated captures of my wife in a bikini, moments he had stolen while pretending to enjoy the scenery. "This isn't love," my sister said finally, her voice icy and controlled. "This is obsession. This is violation." She turned to him, her eyes blazing with fury. "How could you do this? To me? To your own family?" For a moment, he seemed to shrink under her gaze, his earlier bravado crumbling. But then, almost instinctively, he lashed out again. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice desperate. "She makes me feel things I can't explain. You act like I planned this, like I wanted to destroy everything." His excuses fell flat against the weight of the evidence before us. My wife handed over her phone, which contained the text messages and voicemails he had sent after their disastrous lunch meeting. Each message painted a picture of a man spiraling out of control, his apologies laced with thinly veiled threats, his declarations of love bordering on delusional. As my sister listened to the recordings, her hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white with suppressed rage. By the time the confrontation ended, the room felt suffocating, the walls closing in around us. My brother-in-law slumped back onto the couch, defeated, while my sister stood tall, her resolve unshaken. "Pack your things," she said firmly, "and don't think for a second that this is over." Her words carried the finality of a judge delivering a verdict, leaving no room for argument or appeal. The discovery didn't stop at the hundreds of stolen photographs. As my sister delved deeper into the labyrinth of my brother-in-law's obsession, she unearthed something far more sinister: audio recordings. Hidden in a folder labeled innocuously as family gatherings, these short clips captured snippets of private conversations my wife had with others during family events. He had recorded her laughter, her casual banter, and even moments when she was speaking to me on the phone. Each recording was like a shard of glass, cutting through the fragile illusion of normalcy we had clung to, but the photos were what truly sent chills down our spines. Among the countless images, some stood out not because they were candid or natural, but because they were grotesquely altered. Using digital editing tools, he had meticulously manipulated certain pictures to create an alternate reality where my wife and he were together. In one particularly disturbing image, she was photoshopped into a romantic beach sunset scene, her hand intertwined with his as though they were lovers on vacation. Another showed them sitting at a candlelit dinner table, her smiling face glowing under soft lighting that mimicked a date night. These weren't just random edits, they were crafted with obsessive precision, each frame designed to fulfill his twisted fantasy. My sister stared at the screen, her hands trembling so violently that the laptop nearly slipped from her grasp. At first, disbelief clouded her expression, a refusal to accept the depth of his betrayal. But as she scrolled through the folder, her shock gave way to horror, then anger, and finally, a profound sense of betrayal. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, and tears streamed silently down her cheeks. "How could he do this?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. "This isn't love. This is sickness." She called us over, her tone urgent yet eerily calm. When we saw the extent of his obsession, the recordings, the edited photos, we felt a collective shudder run through the room. My wife covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with revulsion. "I had no idea," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "He made me feel safe, like family." The irony was crushing. What we once thought was harmless familiarity had been a facade for something far darker. For my sister, the revelation was devastating. She had trusted him completely, believing their marriage was built on mutual respect and love. Now, Every memory they shared felt tainted by his secret life, a life consumed by an unhealthy fixation on another woman. Her initial reaction was visceral. She wanted to destroy everything he owned, erase all traces of him from their home. But beneath the rage was a deeper sorrow, a realization that the man she loved had never truly existed. Instead, she had been living with a stranger whose mind was a labyrinth of delusions and desires. By the time we left her house that night, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken fears. My sister sat alone in her bedroom, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal. She didn't cry anymore, her tears had dried up, but her silence was louder than any scream. It was the sound of someone grappling with the collapse of everything they believed in. The FaceTime call was meant to uncover the truth, but no one was prepared for the chilling confession that followed. My brother-in-law sat in front of the camera, his face gaunt and shadowed by exhaustion, yet his voice carried an unsettling intensity as he began to speak. At first, his words were hesitant, fragmented, but as the conversation progressed, the floodgates opened, revealing a level of obsession that left us all reeling. "It's not just about attraction," he admitted, his tone trembling with desperation. "I've thought about taking her away. Somewhere no one could find us. An island, maybe. Just her and me." His confession sent a wave of revulsion through the room. My wife stiffened, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if to steady herself. Her face turned pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. But he didn't stop there. He described in vivid detail how he had fantasized about kidnapping her, how he imagined them disappearing together, leaving behind everything and everyone. His words painted a picture of a man consumed by delusion, someone who had blurred the line between love and madness. Then came the part that made my blood run cold. "Every time I see her laugh with you," he said, turning his gaze toward me, "it drives me insane. I want to scream, to break things. I have to fight the urge to do something reckless." His voice cracked under the weight of his own emotions, but the raw honesty in his admission was terrifying. This wasn't just infatuation, it was a dangerous fixation, one that had festered for years in the shadows of our family gatherings. My sister, who had been listening silently until now, finally snapped. "You're sick," she spat, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This isn't love, it's obsession. You're obsessed with someone who doesn't belong to you." Her anger was palpable, her hands clenched into fists as she glared at the screen. My wife, still visibly shaken, nodded in agreement, tears streaming down her face. "How could you think any of this was okay?" she demanded, her voice rising with a mix of fear and fury. The call ended abruptly, but the damage was done. My wife retreated to the couch, her body trembling as she tried to process what she had just heard. My sister paced the room, muttering under her breath about restraining orders and legal action. As for me, I couldn't shake the image of my brother-in-law's hollow eyes, the look of a man who had lost himself to his own delusions. His confession wasn't just disturbing, it was a glimpse into the dark recesses of a mind unraveling, and it left us all questioning how we had missed the signs for so long. My sister didn't just crumble under the weight of betrayal, she rose with a fierce determination that none of us had anticipated. That night, after the confrontation, she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by stacks of documents, screenshots of texts, voicemails, and the disturbing photos he had secretly taken. Her hands moved methodically, organizing evidence like a seasoned detective preparing for the biggest case of her life. "I'm not letting him destroy this family," she declared, her voice steady but laced with steel. "If I have to expose every dirty secret to protect my kids and your wife's dignity, I will." The next morning, she contacted one of the top law firms in the city, sparing no expense to ensure her children's safety. She met with a team of lawyers who assured her that his obsessive behavior would work heavily in her favor during custody hearings. She didn't stop there, she drafted a detailed plan for their future, from relocating to a quieter neighborhood to enrolling the kids in therapy sessions. Every decision was made with precision, driven by an unyielding love for her children. When we asked if she needed time to process everything, she shook her head firmly. "There's no time," she said, her eyes blazing with resolve. "He's already taken too much from us. Now it's my turn to fight back for them." Watching her transform into this pillar of strength was both inspiring and heartbreaking. She wasn't just fighting for justice but also shielding her family from further harm. The email arrived late at night, its subject line innocuous enough to slip past suspicion, a final plea. But as my wife opened it, her blood ran cold. Sent from an unfamiliar account, The message began with a tone of faux sincerity, apologies for his misguided actions and promises to leave her alone if she would only meet him one last time. But beneath the surface of contrition lay something far more sinister. "If you don't respond to how I feel," he wrote, "you'll regret it. Your family will regret it too." The threat was veiled but unmistakable, dripping with menace. What made the email truly chilling, however, was the attachment, a photograph of my wife walking alone on a quiet street earlier that day. It wasn't just any photo, it was taken close enough to capture the faint shadow of her silhouette against the pavement, proof that he had been watching her, stalking her movements without her knowledge. The realization hit us like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just obsessed, he was dangerous. When I saw the email, my hands clenched into fists, rage bubbling beneath the surface. My wife sat frozen, her face pale, trembling as she whispered, "He's still out there, watching me." Her voice cracked under the weight of fear. We immediately called my sister, who listened in stunned silence before declaring, "This ends now." There was no hesitation in her voice, only resolve. She instructed us to forward the email to her lawyer, emphasizing that this new evidence could be pivotal in securing a restraining order. That night, the house felt suffocating, every creak of the floorboards amplifying our unease. My wife refused to sleep alone, clutching my arm as if afraid he might appear in the shadows. Meanwhile, my sister worked tirelessly, coordinating with her legal team to escalate the case. By morning, we had filed a formal complaint, including the email and photo as exhibits of harassment and potential danger. The sense of urgency was palpable. We weren't dealing with mere obsession anymore. This was a man willing to cross boundaries, to instill fear to get what he wanted. And none of us were safe until he was stopped. The aftermath of the betrayal lingered like a dark cloud over our lives, casting long shadows on everyone it touched. My wife, once vibrant and carefree, now seemed fragile, weighed down by guilt and self-doubt. She would often sit in silence, staring out the window as if replaying every interaction with my brother-in-law in her mind. "I should have seen this coming," she murmured one evening, tears streaming down her face. "If I hadn't been so comfortable around him, none of this would have happened." Her words carried the weight of regret, each syllable laced with sorrow. It was heartbreaking to watch her spiral into a mild depression, blaming herself for something she never asked for or encouraged. But the tragedy didn't stop there. It seeped into the lives of the children, who were too young to fully understand yet old enough to feel the tension. The eldest, only 8, began asking questions that no mother should ever have to answer. "Why doesn't Daddy love us anymore?" she asked one night, her voice trembling as she clung to her mother's arm. My sister froze, unable to respond immediately, her own pain magnified by the innocence of the question. Even the younger child, barely 5, started acting out, throwing tantrums and refusing to sleep alone, as though sensing the fractures in their once stable home. Every day felt like walking on eggshells. My wife tried to reassure my sister that none of this was her fault, but the damage had already taken root. The family dinners we used to cherish were replaced by strained silences and unanswered questions. My sister poured all her energy into shielding her kids from the fallout, but it was clear the scars would run deep. For my wife, the guilt was a constant companion, whispering cruel reminders of how her mere presence had unraveled an entire family. The first family counseling session for the 2 children turned into an emotional storm that none of us were prepared for. Sitting in the psychologist's office, we hoped it would be a safe space for them to process their feelings about their father's absence. At first, the younger child clung silently to her mother, while the elder one fidgeted nervously with a toy car. But when the therapist gently asked how they felt about not seeing their dad as much anymore, the room erupted. "I hate him," the eldest screamed, throwing the toy across the room. "I want him to disappear. He doesn't love us anymore." Her words hung heavy in the air, sharp and raw, leaving everyone stunned. My sister froze, tears welling up in her eyes, as she pulled her daughter close, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay, even though deep down, she knew it wouldn't be anytime soon. That moment shattered any illusion that the kids were shielded from the pain. It became painfully clear that the damage ran deeper than we had imagined, seeping into their fragile hearts. My sister spent hours afterward holding them, promising over and over again that no matter what happened, she would always protect them. She realized then that staying in the same city where every corner held memories of betrayal wasn't an option. For their sake, she needed a fresh start. A few days later, she announced her decision to move to another city. "It's the only way," she said firmly, her voice trembling but resolute. They deserve a life without reminders of him, without whispers or stares. The thought of leaving behind her career, her friends, and the life she had built was heartbreaking, but she didn't hesitate. Every sacrifice paled in comparison to ensuring her children's stability and happiness. As she packed boxes late at night, I saw the toll it took on her, dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking slightly, but there was also a quiet strength in her determination. She wasn't just moving, she was rebuilding their future brick by brick. When the kids found out, they cried, asking why they had to leave their school and friends. "Will Daddy find us?" the youngest asked, her voice small and afraid. My sister hugged her tightly, kissing the top of her head. "No, sweetheart. We're going somewhere safe, where it's just us three, and we'll make new memories together." Though her voice wavered, her resolve never faltered. Watching her fight so fiercely for her children reminded me of the depth of a mother's love, a force capable of enduring even the most unimaginable storms. In the wake of betrayal, we learned that trust, though precious, is also fragile, a delicate thread woven into the fabric of relationships. The man who sat at our family dinners, laughed at our jokes, and played with our children turned out to be someone none of us truly knew. His obsession didn't emerge overnight, it festered in silence, hidden beneath layers of familiarity and shared memories. It was a stark reminder that even those closest to us can harbor darkness, their actions capable of unraveling lives without warning. As my sister packed up her life to start anew, she reflected on what had gone wrong, not just within her marriage but within the dynamics of our entire family. "We trusted him blindly," she admitted one evening, her voice heavy with regret. "And maybe that's where we failed. Trust isn't enough if it isn't paired with awareness." Her words resonated deeply, forcing each of us to confront uncomfortable truths about how easily we overlook red flags when they come wrapped in love or loyalty. The ordeal left scars, some visible, others buried beneath the surface. My wife still struggles with guilt, though she knows she did nothing wrong. The children, too, bear the weight of fractured innocence, their questions lingering like shadows in quiet corners of the house. Yet amidst the pain, there is hope, a fragile, flickering light guiding us toward healing. My sister has vowed to rebuild, not just for herself but for her kids, determined to create a future where stability replaces chaos. And my wife, ever resilient, leans on me as we navigate this new reality together. This story taught us that while trust binds families together, it must be tempered with vigilance. Love should never blind us to the truth, nor should closeness shield us from accountability. As we move forward, we carry these lessons with us, reminders that protecting the ones we cherish requires more than faith. It demands action, courage, and an unwavering commitment to safeguarding their well-being. Perhaps the most profound takeaway is this: storms may rage, tearing apart everything we hold dear, but they also reveal what truly matters. Through the wreckage, we discovered strength we didn't know we had, the kind born from unity, resilience, and the unyielding belief that better days lie ahead. Though the road ahead will be long, we walk it together, guided by the hope that love, when nurtured with wisdom and care, can heal even the deepest wounds.